Hello, this is Pat Lynch, and you are listening and watching as the
What?
as the world turns or burns. And I think we're going to focus a little more on the burns at this point, because today we're going to be talking all things tariffs. To really cover the whole subject of tariffs correctly, we have an economist in the house, Mahbubul Kabir. He's our professor of economics, yes,
associate professor
at Lyon College. Also joining us is, as always, behind the desk, seen but heard, is
Producer Cheyenne.
Oh, yes. And then we also have our number one fan. Who's that?
So is it me?
All right. And it actually our only fan, but but we don't count, And then, of course, Kieran O'Keefe, so he's joining us. Brendan's off at a conference, but we had an empty chair. And so, Mahbubul, you're going to more than fill it and kind of just get things started. Explain, what, as an economist, what is the administration trying to do when it comes to tariffs? They have a plan in mind, and I've heard a lot of discussion. But how do you interpret what they are trying to accomplish?
Yes, that's definitely a very common question these days, right? So the way I try to understand, there's so much noise, right? So I tend to ask myself, and sometimes I try to discuss in my class, is what are they really going to accomplish by putting all these tariffs? What will happen? What's their end goal? So one thing could be that maybe we need to bring back all these manufacturing industries to USA, so it will create more jobs. And that is one, the first thing I would say, maybe, right?
Right.
And then if you look at the trade deficits, what they have been talking about. So if you reduce the trade deficit, I hope that is the connection they are trying to establish, that will help to bring back all these manufacturing jobs.
Right.
This is one thing. Plus the other side, they are saying that, that other countries are taking advantage of USA.
Yeah.
So they try to make it, they are trying to level the playing field.
Well, can I ask you a question on that? President Trump, he opened with that, we've been taken advantage of, and he used some pretty colorful words to kind of explain that, we've been, the United States, that has been at a disadvantage for, call it 80 years. And how are, in his mind, how are they taking advantage of us? Is it just by virtue of you have a trade surplus with the United States? That means you're taking advantage of us? Is that kind of the way they're interpreting this?
The way I would put it, that I will not even dare to understand what he's thinking or the way he's thinking. But if I go back to the history the history of these trade theories, the trade has been always sort of an idea is then win-win situation. It's not like a zero-sum game, what we talk about, right? So whenever there's an exchange, even domestically, when I go to a store and buy something, then that store owner would be gaining something and I'll be gaining something. That's a win-win transaction. The same thing between countries.
Right.
So when other countries are selling things to us and we are selling to them, it is not like one country is ripping off the other country. That's the basic idea of any transaction, any efficient transaction. But in those transactions, there can be, not that both the parties will be gaining to the same extent, right? That difference could be there, but it is not like ripping off. I mean, that doesn't make sense. It's difficult to get any sense out of it. Now, there could be some underlying other resentments, because trade, what we explained, that trade makes these transactions efficient and it is pro-efficiency, what we talk about, that division of labor and specialization.
Right.
That is the basic of that trade argument, right? So when let other countries to do whatever they are good at and we'll be doing whatever we are good at, and then we'll exchange. Now, in that process, that part is fine, but that can definitely potentially create a lot of income gap because whatever we are trying to export, say based on those are very capital intensive or human capital knowledge based products. So the demand of those things in the USA would go up. People who have those capitals, those skills, they will benefit. And type of thing that we used to make maybe in 40s, 50s, shoes, clothing and all that.
Yeah.
Folks who used to work there, they lost their demand. So trade will create income gaps, which is very well documented by Paul Samuelson, and that is called Stolper-Samuelson theorem we teach in our international trade. The trade can create this income gap. Definitely, it is there. But the question is how we can address that problem. Back in 60s, during the Kennedy administration, they put in place what is called Trade Adjustment Assistance Act, basically. You know that if I can show that I lost my job because of international trade competition, then they'll be giving me some help, go back to school, which is not always that easy though. So that idea was there. So if I take that part, that income gap, wealth gap in this country has widened definitely, particularly since 1980s, then there is some genuine resentments. I do see that, but I'm not sure how it is going to be addressed by waging these trade wars with other countries.
Anything, Kieran?
I would say one of the issues, the way that Trump is approaching it, is that he's so inconsistent. Like one day there are tariffs on this country and they're not tariffs the next day. And then it's going to be on a certain date, then it doesn't actually happen. And then there's tariffs on everything, then only on certain things, and there's exemptions. And I would guess if you were to talk to the business community right now, what they would want, maybe most of all, is just to know what he's going to do, some kind of like economic certainty, which is very unclear. Because how many times has he postponed like the Canadian and Mexican tariffs? And then I guess they went through yesterday. Haven't heard about them being repealed yet. But there's so much inconsistency. And I think if you're in the business world, you need to be able to plan for the future. And right now it's very hard to plan for the future. And there's some question of whether or not Trump is doing this because he really wants to keep the tariffs on, or if it's some kind of leveraging tool. But in some cases, it's hard to tell like what kind of leverage he wants to exploit, what kind of concessions he wants. Yeah. So knowing what was going through his head is very difficult. And I think if you were to talk to most of the Republicans in Congress, if you talk to them privately, they would agree that Trump is like making a big mistake here. Yeah. But they can't say it publicly in most cases because there are too many political ramifications for that.
Well, it's one of the things that Trump would really like is now he has leverage literally over every country in the planet. I mean, there's even I read in the Times some small island that has no people and only has penguins, and they have a tariff. But now everybody has to negotiate with him in terms of how to bring that tariff down, and so he's now basically just created this whole global set of deals that he's put in motion.
Yeah, there might be some like short-term gains you can get out of that. But I think the long-term, a lot of these countries, if they feel like the United States is not a reliable partner, are just going to shift their economies in other directions.
Right.
So the new Prime Minister of Canada said, was it last week, that the period of integration between the U.S. and Canada is over. Like the relationship is just going to be different going forward. You have to like diversify the Canadian economy, make it less dependent on the American economy. And in the long run, that will probably hurt the United States, even if there are some concessions Trump can gain in the next year or two, or maybe throughout all 4 years. But in the long term, if other countries feel like that somebody like Trump will serve in the future and adopt similar policies that wreck these relationships they established with a different American president, then they have to wonder whether or not it's worth the risk of uncertainty going forward.
Is the country better off, Mahbubul, having it seemed like his end goal would be to just have us be completely self-sufficient, that you would have no imports. And it seems that in this modern world is next to impossible. And even if you get there to a degree, is that really an efficient economy?
Well, that would not be efficient in that sense, right? But going back to what you said about Mr. Trump, that whether he wants to shut down altogether, I don't think so. Yeah. Because you cannot totally shut down, because then there will be no tariff revenue, right? Right. If you increase that tariff revenue to a prohibitive level, then if we stop importing anything, then there will be no government revenue. And that is another part. I think he mentioned about that we can get enough tax revenue from tariff to make up our income tax or whatever that. And for the USA, as we all know, right, for a long time, at least from the beginning of 20th century, 1913, then through to 45, and at that period, after that period, income tax is a big source of revenue. Now, can you replace that with tariff? And today, as a matter of fact, in my class, I was checking, it is around, tariff revenue is around 2 to 3%. How can you make it like 45%, right? Even if you put 200% tariff. Now, if you put 200% tariff, prohibitive tariff, so there will be no imports, there will be no revenue. So that does not also make sense that you can really replace. But going back to the tariff issue, I didn't see that discussion, and maybe it is relevant and helpful in one way. It is called effective rate of protection, because these tariff rates are called nominal. Like I'm putting tax on a final good, finished good, right? Car. But when I'm making these cars, I'm using producers in the USA, they're using a lot of inputs, and those are imported, right? So if you just look at the nominal tariff rate, it does not really give us a complete picture of the how much protection these tariff barriers or tariff structure will be giving to some industries. So there's another way to calculate what you call effective rate of protection, which is, let's say, for example, aluminum industry here. How much value they are adding. Value means when they're importing raw materials from other countries, from domestic market, and then they add something through other factors of production, what you call labor, capital, and all that. So how much extra value they are adding. Now, because of tariff, we could be able to produce, to add more value, and higher the value addition, then we can say, well, we are giving more protection to that industry. And that number or that calculation can take care of what you call cascading effect. Like you are putting tariff on one, but there'll be ripple effect, right? It will be affecting other industries. But when we just look at this nominal tariff, they don't say really actually how much protection. Whether giving protection is right or wrong, that is a different thing.
Right.
How much protection we are giving, we have no idea.
Yeah. Because, if you look at it historically, tariffs were kind of prolonged the Great Depression. Is that a fair statement?
Arguably, there is a very strong argument for that.
Yeah, and so then why all of a sudden pull out the greatest, the kind of the oldies but goodies, and then introduce it now where you have this, we have the strongest economy arguably in the world, and he always has that. Trump always has that long-standing grudge that everybody's taking advantage of us, and he's going to right that wrong. But I don't know anywhere, kind of looking at all the times that tariffs have worked when it really was successful. I think he harkens back to, is it the Golden Age? This thing where is it McKinley? Kieran, where he says that's where we were the wealthiest ever, and he was, the Gilded Age, maybe.
Yeah, like late 19th century.
Yeah.
The government did have a large surplus at points in that period, which is running a surplus today is almost unimaginable for the federal government. So I guess in that sense, maybe that's a little bit of understandable nostalgia, but. I remember listening to his interview with Joe Rogan that he did shortly before the election, and in that he had talked about going back to William McKinley era tariffs and having tariffs that were so great that it could replace the income tax entirely. Right. Which I think if you look at the numbers is really unrealistic. Like you'd have to, before 1913, before the 16th Amendment, the federal government was just so much smaller than it is today, that the military was a fraction of what it is today. You didn't have Social Security, didn't have Medicare, didn't have Medicaid. There are so many other areas, too, where the federal government has expanded over the years. So getting back down to that level where you could make it viable that the tariff and then excise taxes were the other big source before the income tax, so that they would be able to replace the income tax is, I think, pretty unrealistic. And also, I think my understanding of economics, and it's not going to be as deep as others, but is that if you have tariffs, high tariffs tend to be regressive taxes, and they tend to hurt people who make less more than people who make more. Whereas if you have the income tax, one reason that was very popular in the progressive era in the early 20th century was that you could make it progressive, as the name says,
Right.
make it so that people who make more pay a higher percentage of an income tax than
Ability
somebody
to
who makes
pay
less.
principal.
Yeah, so it's not even. I think a lot of his supporters who are not always very well off don't realize that going with tariffs would actually probably be a detriment to their own pocketbook at the end of the day.
Yeah. What's if playing this out? We haven't heard yet about any kind of reciprocal tariffs, because I think the strategy with our administration was that they placed all these. They announced the tariffs yesterday, placed them all at different levels to the country, and they're assuming that now they're not going to push the EU. China is not going to push back. Of course they are. So then what happens, Mahbubul? I mean, is it just an escalation, or no way of resolving it?
Going back to that 1930s,
Yeah.
that one, right? So
Right.
that was an one-time play of that game. Sort of, we raised the
Mm-hmm.
tariff rate. Other countries they did. So that is what you call bigger thy neighbor policy, right?
Right.
So we cannot expect that we'll be doing it at the expense of other countries, because they'll be doing the very similar thing. And I think I remember that in those days, in old textbooks, there will be a cobweb diagram.
Mm-hmm.
That means before 1929, that, and after, how fast the world trade started to shrink because of this tariff.
Mm-hmm.
So global trade went down. But going back to another basic question, as I started off today, that given all this noise, all these things are happening,
Mm-hmm.
how to put our heads around these? So one is that if it is division of labor, if it is about specialization, if it is about efficiency, and ultimately it is about where it is cheaper to produce. So
Right.
if we ask that, why did we start importing things from other countries, right?
Yeah.
First thing. So back in those days, when we used to make all these clothing, shoes, and everything, and at one point, all these industries, they moved from the East Coast to the South, and ultimately they went to China. Even not in
Right.
China. Now they have ended up in a big way in Bangladesh.
Right.
Bangladesh, I believe, is the second exporting garment exporter in the world, maybe. So why did it happen? I think the reason was it was more costly to produce those things in the USA.
Right.
Now the question is, even if with all this tariff, if Mr. Trump is right that we'll bring back all these industries, everything, so are you expecting to see more cobblers on our streets making shoes? And we'll be seeing our farmers using horses and donkeys and cows to plow our lands? Well, yes, then there'll be more jobs.
Right.
So what has changed over this period that will make the American producers now more competitive, that they can produce these things
Right.
at a lower cost than what the Chinese workers are doing?
Yeah.
I don't know that part.
Yeah.
But that would be very, I think it's a good question. It should be a good question to ask.
Yeah, because isn't, as far as in economic terms, it's always better to let like production go to the place where it's the cheapest to make it.
Yeah, ultimately it is about
Then us as consumers, we benefit because it keeps the cost down. Yeah, we all start wanting to bring cobblers and making shoes here in the U.S., and now you've doubled the cost of like Nike. Nike is very prominent in Vietnam, I believe. That's and so now moving that out of Vietnam back to the United States, I don't know what kind of cost differential that'll be.
Yeah, and if I may jump in here, that
Yeah.
because of all these trade deals that we started making, and not only bilateral, multilateral trade deals after the GATT and World Trade Organization, lowering down the tariff and also non-tariff trade barriers, what we have been doing since the Second World War time, after the Second World War, right? If all those things were so bad and wrong, then our unemployment rate in this country should have been going through the ceiling. That did not happen. Even up until recent time, unemployment rate was very low. Our economy expanded, right?
Right.
Almost like $30 trillion of GDP. So even if you bring back all those jobs, how many extra jobs you'll be creating? Because there's a natural rate of unemployment, what you say,
Right.
4-5%. So what will be adding? So I think going back to that, there are resentments, there are complaints, definitely in some pockets of.
Sure.
That is what we need to address, and I don't know exactly how to address that.
Yeah. Disputes like this, were they in the past, like, would they be settled, like, either between countries or the world,
World
or is
Trade
the World
Organization-
Trade Organization even a thing now? I don't know.
Well-
It seems they're pretty quiet, and I don't know if the Trump administration will even adhere or listen to anything that they say.
Yeah, my sense is nobody's expecting even that WTO can do anything.
Yeah,
Because if you don't follow, then they cannot enforce anything like any
Mhm.
international organization.
right.
So nobody can enforce anything.
Yeah. So, so is this really the unwinding of a global economy? And now it's just, I don't know what is going to be next, but it was 80 years basically in the making to have it be very, very intertwined. We saw just based on supply chains how elaborate everything was once the pandemic hit and those supply chains got broke, and now it's kind of like this process of trying to completely reconfigure,
Yeah.
where capital is going to be.
Here, what I see that this damage, right? Whatever we are doing,
Hmm.
is it just short term? That okay, we can fix it within 6 months.
Right.
But if you think about this global supply chain and all that, and if we are really dismantling all these things, so all other countries they'll try to find some other way, and this damage, I don't think that will be easily recoverable.
Right.
That we will just turning a switch on and off. It will
Right.
be not like that. So it depends how long it continues. Only one thing today I was sharing at that Wall Street Journal, they were saying that stock market is down,
Yeah.
and dollar is weak. So if the market really reacts, and then maybe there will be some
Yeah.
waking up on the part of these policymakers to think, well, maybe it is not working. Otherwise,
Well,
I don't know.
With the dollar weakening, isn't that one of Trump's priorities? Because he felt that then exports, American exports would be more affordable with everyone around the world.
Yeah, but if they put tariff, then that will extra. That will
Right.
There is a trade-off, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. 6 months from now, 1 year from now, where do you predict this will end up?
You're asking me?
Yes. We have an expert. We got to take all advantages of having an expert in the house.
My sense is it depends on the political economy,
Mhm.
right? The sooner people can see all these things, maybe then government will. Trump administration may revisit all these whatever they're
Right.
doing. Otherwise, just by criticizing, but just by asking these questions would not help much.
Right.
But they don't care about these things.
Is there anything good that will come out of this? I mean, it seems real. Personally, I have a real pessimistic view of the future based on what these are doing. But are there like trade inequities that can be fixed? Like what's an example? Like that American rice producers cannot sell to Japan. Japan creates all these artificial barriers that won't allow them to export rice, to protect their own
Japan
industry.
is very sensitive about that.
Yeah.
For their cultural reason.
Yeah, but is there some things where some of these inequities can be resolved?
Nothing is coming very straightforward.
Yeah. What?
Nothing is coming to me very clear cut. But you are asking that what is the sort of a positive side?
Yeah.
What
Is there
good-
anything?
anything
Yeah.
good can happen out of all this
Yes.
mess? Out of all this mess. I don't know.
I remember during
Yeah.
his first term, maybe I mentioned this in a previous episode we did, but he put some tariffs on steel from China, I believe, and
Right.
there was a study that showed it did create some steel jobs. It resulted in more jobs being lost overall,
Right.
but it did in this very particular industry help some job creation. So
Yeah.
maybe there's some limited benefit domestically. It could lead to a little bit more manufacturing in the U.S., but I think the catch with that is it has to be like a clearer policy and plan going forward. This whole back and forth,
Mhm.
maybe we'll have tariffs, maybe we won't, maybe it'll be this much, maybe that much. I think if you want to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., if it's actually your plan, which I think is problematic in a lot of ways, but if that's actually Trump's plan, he'd have to be more consistent in what he's doing.
Yeah.
But to Kiran's point, yeah, it is true that when you're protecting one particular industry,
Mm-hmm.
they should be able to create more jobs
Right.
because they can then compete with the imported goods
Mhm.
because the price would go up. But the question is that I think there is an estimate that we have lost more jobs in shipbuilding industry and other industries than the number of jobs that we were able to create in steel or aluminum.
Right.
So there's a net loss.
Yeah.
So that is why I was saying this is a political economy. If policymakers think that, well, jobs in the steel industry and aluminum industries are more important than the jobs in the shipbuilding industry, then you can justify.
And isn't a lot of the job loss also due to automation? I know when I was going to college, I spent summers working in Ford plants. My dad worked at Ford and could get me a job, and doing assembly, like assembly line work. And I remember my brother, who was a die maker, 20 years later brought me back to the plant that I worked at, and it was all robotics. Every job that I had done was automated. So there's nothing devious about that. That's just production efficiency. And we're going to see more of that. I know, like Amazon, their long-term goal is to try and automate their warehouses and eliminate the human element. And I mean, is that kind of where the economy's going?
It looks like, I don't know about the role of AI.
Is going to true. Change. Yeah.
But one more thing is not really in the optimist or tone of optimism,
right?
Which is that what the U.S. government has started doing now, it can leave a very bad taste for the future, right? Mm-hmm. Because you are almost discrediting all these international organizations which we put in place after the Bretton Woods conference in 1946. Right. So in the future, right? Because I remember I'm originally from Bangladesh, and I remember back in mid-80s, we would have a lot of consultants from Harvard and many other places. They would be giving some consultancy to the Bangladesh government to liberalize, right? And the whole mantra was to liberalize your economy, take down tariff and all that. So after all these, I think U.S. government will not have much credibility to give that mantra or the slogans to any other countries. That will be a sort of a permanent loss damage.
Yeah, I think the America First slogan to me is really America alone. It's like this whole idea that the United States needs to be completely independent, completely self-sufficient, needs to really limit its relationship and interwoven relationships with the rest of the world, and just function on its own. I think that's pretty unrealistic in a world where we make up 4 or 5% of the population and are still the largest economy, but a shrinking percentage of the world's GDP at least. As other countries, industrialize and grow faster percentage-wise than the U.S. So I don't know. It seems very unrealistic to me. It seems like Trump wants to bring back the America that he knew when he was a teenager. It's kind of what it comes down to. I think like the nostalgia from what he imagines America's greatness from the mid-20th century.
Yeah. Well, dramatic change of subject. The 22nd Amendment. President Trump, he's not happy just with this term. He's been kind of trolling, teasing that he's considering a third term. Kind of. Kieran, what the 22nd Amendment? It was created when FDR was president? Is that
when Truman was president?
Truman,
after FDR. Yeah, Washington set the 2-term precedent in the 1790s, ran twice, and then retired after a second term. And every president mostly observed that up until FDR. And then FDR ran 4 times, elected 4 times, died at the beginning of his 4th term. And then that was the idea of someone breaking Washington's his precedent and running 4 times. It rubbed some people the wrong way. And so a couple of years after FDR's death, Congress moved to create the 22nd Amendment, which says you can only be elected for 2 terms, and if you're the vice president and you become president, you can run for re-election for what would be kind of a 3rd term if you serve less than 2 years of the term from which you inherited from the previous president. So you could serve up to 10 years technically, but two times elected is all you can be. And that was to follow Washington's precedent, and the idea is transfer of power. And if you have term limits in an executive position, you are going to rotate people out of office and ideally stop tyranny.
So a avoiding a constitutional crisis, how would Trump be able to get a third term? What's the scenario?
I think there are a couple ways that would be legal. So one is you could amend the Constitution to get rid of it. That's not going to happen, though. That's a total pipe dream. The threshold for amendments is so high that this would have very little support. It wouldn't go anywhere. So there's that. The other option is that the 22nd Amendment says that you can only be elected twice. It doesn't say you can't serve twice, more than twice. So I guess in theory, this would be crazy. A lot of weird things have to happen. But you could see a situation where, say, J.D. Vance runs for the presidency in 2028 and Trump runs as vice president. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if they won, Trump would be elected to the vice presidency, not to the presidency. And theoretically, J.D. Vance could, I guess, resign, and then Trump could inherit the presidency for a third time, more or less. And they'd have to do the same thing over again if he wanted to run for a fourth time, basically. So that's like, I do think it's an unlikely scenario, but he keeps on saying it, and he's got such a strong base of support that I think we're going to hear about it the next few years. I expect it won't actually go anywhere. But you could see other scenarios, too, that could devolve into a constitutional crisis. Like, say the 2028 election is between J.D. Vance and some Democrat, ends up being pretty close. And Trump is like, well, we need to get things figured out, so I'm just going to stay in office while we figure things out, and then just doesn't leave, right?
Sure.
Which is, in some ways what he tried to do in 2020.
2020,
So it's, I don't know, it's just there are other presidents who were critical of the 22nd Amendment, which might surprise people now because it's so baked into our culture that you serve 2 times and you're done. But like Ronald Reagan criticized it in his second term. He thought he should be able to run a third time.
Ooh, that would have been...
I mean, he didn't think he could do it, but he thought they shouldn't have passed the 22nd Amendment.
Oh, okay. Because, he was starting to... he was mentally declined by the end of his second term. And
so that could have led to some problems. But I think the argument he made is that if the voters want to vote me in a third time, why not let them do it? Now, he didn't contest it. The Constitution's very clear on the issue. Yeah. Even Bill Clinton, he served 2 terms, and he was very young when he was done with the presidency because he was elected so young. And he said something to the effect of his presidency that maybe it should be amended so that you can only serve 2 consecutive terms, and you can take a term off and come back and serve another term if you wanted to.
Sure.
So Clinton talked about it a little bit. Was that 25 years ago now? But we'll see what happens with Trump. I think this will be an issue in the coming years that he'll at least float it repeatedly. It's not going to go anywhere. Maybe he's just trolling the population.
MSNBC has to have something to rant and rave about. So I think he's helping them.
Yeah. So maybe we're talking about it and totally feeding into it. But you don't know. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he tried something, and not that it will necessarily go anywhere, but he might well try something.
Well, good.
Or it could be a sort of a distraction to the current policies that he's pursuing.
Yes.
Right. So another rough thing that everybody will start talking about that.
And he is truly a master at flooding the zone and having one thing after another thing to get people off the topic, and so you can expect that there might be some more of that. It's just it's
but
amazing.
To be fair, in one way, I don't think that we have to only blame President Trump, but that the media, they need something, so they are also hungry for that.
Right.
He knows that, so it's like
absolutely.
So they take advantage of it.
Yeah,
they can cut down all these things.
Oh yeah,
right? But they don't do that.
It plays into I think the fears people have about Trump that he's somebody who won't give up power, based on what happened in his first term.
Yeah.
So the media feeds into a lot of things, and this is maybe another one that's gotten blown out of proportion, as we're also talking about it. But I don't know. He's very good at trolling people. He's kind of like an internet troll in real life in some respects.
Oh yeah. Well, with that, I think we kind of wrap things up now. Before we do, we got to have Mahbubul, a promise that you're going to come back at another time. It took a lot of work to get you here, but I think there's going to be a lot of economic news that we're going to have to digest and understand, and we hope that we can have you as a guest in the future.
Okay.
All right, I put him on the spot. Here it is.
Well,
It won't
maybe,
take-
we could talk about government jobs these days, right?
Oh my goodness,
Government
yeah.
budgets and all. That is a big thing now going on.
Do we have a number as far as how many jobs have been lost right now through all the Doge layoffs? I just couple 200,000.
I'm not sure.
But not
Yeah.
only government job, the private contractors, right?
Yeah.
They have been laid off because they don't have anything to do now.
Yeah.
They're
Sure.
not federal employees, but they get paid.
Yeah. And I saw a thing with it was a job fair in the Washington D.C. area, and you had all these people that were attending, and they have these like amazing jobs, in the CDC and defense, not the Defense Department, in like Office of Management and Budget or USAID, and it's not like those jobs, the type of skills they have are just something that you'll find people hiring at a job fair. I mean, it's
Yeah, but I was
Yeah.
maybe reading or listening something that New York State was trying to, take some of these folks. Plus, I think in Germany and France, they have put a new project sort of, at least in France maybe, they're trying to take all these scientists
yeah.
here to France and Germany.
Oh,
And I
okay.
was wondering that after Second World War, USA here, they got the benefits of that, right? Scientists came here.
Mhm.
So maybe for the Europe now, it's a big chance to take these folks there,
Right.
because I think it's fair to say, right, that the European, all these economies have been falling behind in terms of productivity,
Right.
technical innovations, and all that. So this is a very good time for them
Mm.
to get all these things at a very low price.
Yes.
These folks, they're desperate to get a
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
So that will be something new.
That's one of the benefits the United States has had is that people want to come here. You have great funding for all sorts of research and in science and technology. A lot of startup companies want to begin in the U.S., not begin elsewhere. And if you make the environment hostile to that, then maybe they'll go somewhere else. And that's an advantage to why the U.S. has maintained economic growth. I think when European countries have not to the same degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, the creativity, innovation. This is what I usually say, that the whole society here is so welcoming and
Yeah.
you feel comfortable, right? So that is why people don't go to some other places.
Right.
That is our main strength. And if we lose that one, then we'll be losing that big attraction,
Yeah.
people to come here.
Because as far as startups, that it's a more welcoming environment when it comes to accepting failure. Because there's the whole venture capital ecosystem. They already build in their business model that they'll make 100 investments, knowing that 90 of them are going to fail, and that's fine because they're looking for that one or two investments that give them the 10x, 20x return that then covers it pays them all handsomely. But it's I think in other parts of the world it's much more conservative, and so they won't be accepting of companies that start up, you raise capital and fail for whatever reason. So it's more caution, more conservative, and then with that you get less innovation and less new startups. That the next big thing. Well, all right. Well, then I think that pause it gives me the opportunity to just say thank you to our audience. Great. Yeah. Thank you, Mahbubul. Thank you, Kieran. Thank you, Sajani. Yeah. Can we hear from you?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh,
I took
okay.
notes, too.
Oh, she took. Oh, Sajani took notes. We now have an official note taker of the As the World Turns or Burns podcast. And then, as always, Cheyenne, thank you very much. Cheyenne's giving me the eye roll because she knows what's coming next, and it's always the proverbial question: where can our listeners find our podcast?
Everywhere.
Oh, you've truncated. Oh,
I don't know the exact number, but probably everywhere.
Oh, okay. Okay, and if they find us and they like what they heard and they want to leave a rating or review, how many stars would we ask them to give us?
5 out of 5.
That's right. All right. Real good. Well, we got that part done. Well, thank you for listening, watching the As the World Turns or Burns podcast. Also just we'll do a quick shout out to Jayson Nichols over there in France. He does editing and helps Cheyenne in making the show happen. So Jayson, it's the end of the show. We'll test you and see if you're listening. So, and as always, I always told him he's my huckleberry, and he knows what that means. All right. So thanks again, and we hope you'll catch us for our next show in 2 weeks. Take care.
This podcast is sponsored in part by Lyon College and KILT Studios. Thank you to Jonah Winter for the intro and outro music.